Welcome to Lord Nightmare channel. We share scary stories with rainy ambience. I hope this video helps you in some way to sleep, relax, or just be entertained for a while. If you enjoy it, please think about subscribing and hitting the thumbs up button to help my channel out. Now let's begin.
I never used to believe that the mundane could turn terrifying. But last year, a simple trip to the mall for Christmas shopping changed everything for me. It was a cold December evening, the kind where the air feels sharp against your skin. The streets were glittering with Christmas lights, and every store window was decked out in holiday cheer. You'd think that nothing bad could happen on a night like that. I'd put off my shopping until the last minute, typical me, so I decided to head to one of those massive shopping malls that stay open late during the holidays. It was bustling with people, the kind of crowd that makes you feel both surrounded and isolated at the same time. There were kids screaming, holiday music blasting from every store, and shoppers rushing around with their arms full of bags. I had a list of gifts to buy, so I started in the electronics store. It was packed, and the energy felt chaotic. As I browsed the aisles, I got that strange sensation you sometimes get, like someone was watching me. I glanced around, but no one seemed to be paying me any attention. Just a tired cashier ringing up endless purchases and a handful of shoppers too absorbed in their own business to notice me. I brushed it off and moved on to the next store. But as I walked through the mall, I started noticing something strange. You know how malls have mirrors and reflective surfaces everywhere? I kept catching glimpses of someone in my peripheral vision. A man, tall and thin, wearing a long black coat and a knit beanie. But whenever I turned to look directly, he wasn't there. At first, I thought I was just imagining things. It had been a long day, and I was probably overtired. But it kept happening. In the reflection of a glass door, in the chrome trim of a store display, in the shiny tiles of the floor. Always the same man. I tried to shake it off. I mean, malls are crowded. Maybe I'd just seen the same guy a few times, and my brain was playing tricks on me. But the more I noticed him, the more uneasy I felt. There was something about the way he stood, too still, like he wasn't actually shopping, just watching. I told myself I was being paranoid and forced myself to keep shopping. By the time I reached the third store on my list, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. But then, as I was checking out, I saw him again. This time, not in a reflection. He was standing just outside the store, leaning against a pillar. Not looking at anything in particular, but somehow it felt like his presence was directed at me. The cashier handed me my bag, and I hurried out, determined not to look at him. My heart was racing, and I was starting to feel genuinely scared. I decided to cut my trip short and head back to my car. The parking lot was in the underground garage beneath the mall, and as I descended the escalator, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following me. The sound of footsteps echoed faintly behind mine, but when I glanced over my shoulder, no one was there. By the time I reached my car, I was on edge. The garage was nearly empty, the fluorescent lights casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in ways they shouldn't. I fumbled with my keys, feeling like every second it took to unlock my car was a second too long. When I finally got the door open, I practically threw my bags inside and jumped into the driver's seat. But as I reached to close the door, I froze. In the side mirror, I saw him again. The man in the black coat, standing just a few feet behind my car, half hidden by a concrete pillar. He wasn't moving, just standing there. My throat went dry, and my hands trembled as I reached for the lock. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. The sound echoed loudly in the empty garage, but the man didn't flinch. He just stood there, staring. I don't remember much about driving home that night. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. Who was he? Why was he following me? Was he even real? Part of me wanted to believe it was all just a weird coincidence, or maybe even my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. For For the next few days, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye or feel a presence when I was alone. I stopped going out at night, started double-checking all the locks on my doors and windows. But the worst part? The man's face. I never saw it clearly. It was always obscured by shadows, reflections, or distance. And that made it so much worse because my mind filled in the blanks with something far more terrifying than any real face could be. I never told anyone about what happened. It sounds too unbelievable, too paranoid. But every year, when Christmas rolls around, I find myself thinking about that night. About the man in the black coat. And I can't help but wonder if he's still out there, watching someone else. So, if you're out shopping this holiday season, pay attention to your surroundings. Because sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones you see, but the ones you almost see. It was 2 weeks before Christmas, and I was desperate to find the perfect gift for my little niece. She'd been raving about a specific toy, some limited edition doll that was sold out everywhere. Every store I called told me the same thing. Sorry, we're out of stock. But then one store mentioned they'd just gotten a shipment that morning, and if I hurried, I might snag one. I didn't waste a second. It was already late evening, and the roads were slick with icy slush. By the time I got to the mall, the parking lot was almost empty. The mall itself felt eerily quiet, the kind of silence that presses in on you when the crowds have thinned but the place isn't quite closed yet. A few stores were still open, their neon signs casting flickering light onto the polished floors. I rushed to the toy store on the second floor. As I pushed through the glass doors, I immediately felt a sense of relief. They had the doll. The last one, sitting on a shelf at the back of the store. I practically sprinted to grab it, as if someone else might appear and snatch it first. With the doll clutched in my hands, I made my way to the counter to pay. The cashier, a woman who looked as exhausted as I felt, rang up the purchase without much small talk. As she handed me the bag, she glanced over my shoulder and frowned slightly, like she'd seen something strange. But when I turned to look, there was no one there. "That's odd," she muttered under her breath, but when I asked her what she meant, she just shook her head. "Nothing. Just tired, I guess." I didn't press her. I wanted to get home, and honestly, the empty mall was starting to give me the creeps. I headed toward the escalator, but as I reached it, I noticed something strange. There was another escalator, one I'd never seen before. It wasn't marked with a sign, and it wasn't moving. Just a set of stairs leading downward into what looked like a dimly lit lower level. Now, I've been to this mall dozens of times. I know it like the back of my hand, and I was certain there was no basement. But there it was, plain as day, like it had always been there. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of me. Maybe it was a storage floor or an area they'd recently opened up. I figured it couldn't hurt to take a quick look. As I descended, the air grew colder, the faint hum of the mall above fading into an unsettling quiet. The lights down here were dim and flickering, casting long, shifting shadows across the concrete walls. The space didn't feel like a part of the mall. It felt older, like it had been abandoned and forgotten for years. The further I went, the more I realized how wrong this place felt. The halls were lined with empty storefronts, their windows dusty and cracked. Some had mannequins inside, but they weren't the kind you see in regular stores. Their faces were blank, featureless, and their limbs were posed in unnatural, almost grotesque positions. One mannequin was bent backward at the waist, its head tilted toward the floor as if it were listening for something. Another had its arms stretched out, fingers clawed like it was trying to grab at anyone who passed by. I should have turned back, but I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe this was some part of the mall that was under renovation. But as I walked further, I realized there was no end in sight. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, and the air grew heavier, harder to breathe. Then I heard it, a faint shuffling sound, like footsteps, but uneven and dragging. My heart started to pound as I strained to listen. The sound was coming from behind me. I turned around, but the hallway was empty. The mannequins stood exactly where they had been, frozen in their grotesque poses. But then I noticed something. One of them was different. Closer. It wasn't possible. I hadn't passed that mannequin on my way down the hall. It had been in one of the storefronts, pressed against the glass. Now it stood in the middle of the hallway, tilted slightly forward as if it were about to take a step. I told myself it was my imagination, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I turned back to keep walking, I heard it again. The shuffling. Closer this time. My chest tightened as I forced myself to look back. There was another mannequin, closer still. Its arms were raised now, reaching forward, and its head, if you could call it that, was tilted unnaturally to one side. I started to back away, my breathing shallow, my legs trembling. The hallway felt like it was closing in, the walls narrowing, the shadows thickening. Then the lights flickered and went out completely. I don't remember much after that. I must have run, because the next thing I knew, I was back in the main mall, clutching the doll so tightly my knuckles were white. The escalator was gone, and the hallway where it had been was just a blank wall. I didn't stick around to question it. I bolted for the exit and didn't stop until I was safely inside my car. To this day, I can't explain what happened. I haven't been back to that mall since, and I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that faint shuffling sound in my dreams. And when I wake up, I swear I can feel something watching me from the shadows. The Last Shopper. It was Christmas Eve, and I was doing what I swore I'd never do again, last-minute shopping. The mall was open late, catering to desperate people like me who had procrastinated. I arrived around 8 p.m., and the place was already thinning out. Most shoppers had finished their business and gone home, but a few stragglers wandered aimlessly, just like me. The mall was decorated to the nines, oversized ornaments hanging from the ceiling, twinkling lights wrapped around every column, and a giant Santa's workshop display in the center of the main atrium. But the festive atmosphere didn't ease my growing unease. Something felt off. Maybe it was the quiet. Too quiet for a mall this close to Christmas. I shrugged it off and focused on my list. A gift for my sister, my dad, and something small for a coworker. Easy enough. I decided to start in the department store on the far end of the mall, where they sold everything from clothes to kitchen gadgets. When I got there, the place was practically empty. A tired employee stood at the register, scrolling on their phone. The music playing over the speakers was distorted, the usual holiday tunes warped, as if the speakers were damaged. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine but kept moving. As I wandered through the aisles, I started noticing something strange. There was someone else shopping, a man. He was tall and gaunt, wearing a long gray coat that seemed too thin for the weather. At first, I didn't pay much attention. There's nothing odd about seeing another shopper, right? But then I noticed how he moved. He wasn't browsing. He didn't stop to look at anything. He was just walking, slowly, methodically, always in the next aisle over from me. I thought maybe I was imagining things, but then it happened again. I turned a corner, and there he was, standing at the end of the aisle, not looking at me directly but just standing there. His head was slightly tilted down, his face hidden in the shadows of the dim department store lighting. My stomach twisted as I realized he wasn't holding anything. No basket, no cart, no items. Just standing there. Trying not to overthink it, I grabbed the last item I needed and headed to the checkout. The cashier barely looked up as I handed her the items. But just as she was bagging the last one, she paused. Her eyes flicked behind me, her face tightening. "You okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She blinked and forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired," but I could tell she wasn't. Her hands shook slightly as she handed me the receipt, and when I turned to leave, I noticed she was staring past me, right where I'd felt someone standing. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if he was there. I headed for the exit, but as I reached the mall's main corridor, the lights above me flickered, then dimmed. The once bright decorations now cast eerie, muted glows, their festive cheer drained into something wrong. The air felt heavier, colder, and the few remaining shoppers were nowhere to be seen. It was just me, alone in the mall, or so I thought. I quickened my pace, the sound of my footsteps echoing unnaturally in the empty space. But then behind me I heard it, a soft, deliberate shuffle. Someone walking, slowly, dragging their feet just enough to send a chill down my spine. I stopped and listened, my pulse pounding in my ears. The sound stopped too. I turned around, scanning the hallway. It was empty, but as I turned back, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, a shadow slipping into a side hallway. I told myself I was imagining things, that the holiday stress and lack of sleep were getting to me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I pulled out my phone and glanced at the time, 9:15 p.m. The mall closed at 10. I decided to make a beeline for the parking lot. The closer I got to the exit, the worse the feeling grew. The shuffling sound returned, louder now, echoing off the walls. And then, just as I reached the doors leading to the parking garage, the automatic doors refused to open. I froze. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, wide-eyed and pale. Behind me I saw him, the man in the gray coat. He was closer now, standing just a few feet behind me, his face still obscured. But this time I could see his hands. They were wrong. Too long. Fingers that stretched unnaturally, twitching slightly as if they were aching to grab something. To grab me. Panic surged through me, and I slammed my fists against the doors, praying they'd open. When they didn't, I turned to face him, ready to yell, to do something. But he was gone. The hallway was empty again. Heart racing, I turned back to the doors, and they finally slid open with a soft hiss. I bolted into the parking garage, my footsteps echoing wildly in the cavernous space. My car was at the far end, and as I ran, I fumbled for my keys. The shuffling sound was back, louder now, closer. I glanced over my shoulder and saw him again, stepping out from behind a concrete pillar. He wasn't walking anymore. He was running. I sprinted to my car, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The moment I reached it, I yanked the door open, threw myself inside, and hit the lock button. The shuffling stopped, and I dared to look up. He was standing right in front of my car, his face finally visible. His skin was pale and stretched tight over his skull, his eyes sunken and black, his mouth twisted into an unnatural grin. He raised one of those grotesque hands and pressed it against the windshield, the glass fogging beneath his touch. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I backed out of the spot. When I shifted into drive and looked back, he was gone. Just like that. I didn't stop driving until I got home, shaking so badly I could barely unlock my door. To this day, I don't know who or what he was. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear that shuffling sound. And I wonder if he's still following me, waiting for me to make another mistake. If you've ever had an experience like this, something you can't quite explain, let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Followed? Maybe you've seen something strange while out shopping, especially during the holidays. I'd love to hear your stories, and who knows, maybe yours will be the next one I share. Let me know. I'm waiting to hear from you.